Welcome, St. John's School community. Welcome to another episode of Thinking Ahead with your head of school, Lorraine Lago. I'm thrilled to have two amazing guests this afternoon with me. Two of our star teachers, Miss Raquel Maldonado and Miss Beatriz Ramírez. And you may wonder why these two teachers are with me today. We're going to be talking about a recently formed Race and Equity Committee in our school. That is, and I'm going to let them speak about the vision of the committee, but that has begun its work this school year. And I think it's important that the community hears about the amazing things that are happening and are to come that are going to enhance education and the experience your children have at our school. Um, the topic of race and equity has come up quite a bit in conversations that I've had at lunchtime in the hallways. And I was surprised to see through the years that there were a lot of different levels of understanding and of knowledge around the topics and different levels of awareness, and particularly self-awareness, not only among faculty, but among students. So I began conversations with different people, and from from these conversations, the committee was born. And after a few meetings, both Raquel and Beatriz became chairs of the committee. So they're here with me today, and they're going to be telling us a little bit about why we are doing this work and where we are with the work. So, Bea, I'm going to start with you because you and I had a conversation before the committee was created. And I'd like to hear your perspective. You know, if you can tell us a little bit about where we met, where our minds met when we had this conversation, um, and how we decided to move ahead.
Well, in the fall term of 2019, we were discussing professional development about race and racial literacy for staff and faculty. I believe we had this conversation many times, and one of the things that triggered it or started it was the Halloween costumes, right? Choices in costumes that students made, faculty made, staff made, right? And the awareness or the lack of awareness of, you know, cultural sensitivity or the idea that you don't wear an ethnicity as a costume, which we see in TV. So it's difficult to educate or to be aware of certain things when you see them in mainstream media. I think that's one of the starters of our conversation. So I believe you actually challenged me to, okay, so what can we do about it, right? And I started looking for PDs about it. And I thought first of starting small,
PD meaning professional development for.
professional, I'm sorry, of like having some of us go to, I particularly looked at the Lion Story in the University of Pennsylvania, which is a program that deals with racial literacy in educational institutions, particularly those where the population doesn't necessarily um, see themselves as centers of that conversation, right? For various reasons. Um, so in the beginning of our conversation, because I know we've had conversations with other people, we thought of having 4 people go, which were the dean of students, the dean of academics, Professor Maldonado, because she had the a honors code club, right? So we thought that was very pertinent, and me, because I was, the one that brought it up. Um, but then we even found out about when, where, right? And we scheduled. We were trying to schedule a professional development for June of 2020, and then the pandemic happened. The pandemic.
Exacto. And although this may seem, oh God, the pandemic happened and it derailed plans, I think that it derailed them in a in a direction that may end up to be better for our institution. Um, so Raquel was one of the first people that Beatriz mentioned that would not only uh, want to participate in professional development, but also should be part of a committee if we created one. So I want to ask Raquel a little bit about what Raquel was doing a lot of work with students at the time around these topics. So I'm going to ask Raquel if she could tell us a little bit about what she was seeing within the student community that made her also support this initiative.
Well, that year, the 2019-2020 year, I was the advisor to the sophomore class. And I'm a social studies teacher, clearly. Well, not clearly, but I'm a social studies teacher. And so as a social studies teacher, I always found opportunities to talk about current events and not just historical events. So in my classroom, there was always the opportunity to connect things that were happening to the students to things that we were studying about from 100 years ago. And also, as the advisor to the sophomore class, I had a relationship to various students where they would talk to me about things that were happening at the school. So there were some conversations about some offensive language that was heard and offensive graffiti that was seen. And I feel like I had a number of students that came to me to talk to me about these things. And in addition to, Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Sanabria as well, like they were looped in as well. And so then this year I created a student club called the Anti-Racist Leadership Collective. And I was nervous that I wouldn't have too much participation, but many students came to see what the club was about. And I'd say that we have about 15 students on every Wednesday coming. And they consistently come, and we are reading a book called Me and White Supremacy. And we work through it every week, a chapter a week. And we have some really amazing conversations. I think it's a place, our meeting is a place where students can ask questions. Students can make themselves vulnerable. And students can really listen. And it's been an important place for me as well.
So, Bea, so from Raquel's description, I think I hear two things. One, that things were happening within our community that were hopefully not ill-intentioned, but the product of lack of knowledge, perhaps. In terms of the faculty, what were you seeing, Beatriz, around the topic of race and equity?
There is an unevenness in awareness of terminology, current events, and whatnot. And, that depends on many factors, discipline, perspective, right? So that unevenness doesn't allow us to create a common front that can maneuver racial tensions that can happen in the school, which are unfortunately unavoidable, given that we have a diverse population and not everybody, again, has the same perspective or awareness. We have people from different countries, we have people from different religions, we have people from different ethnicities. So, things are going to happen. and the lack of a common language and understandings in terms of race and racism as a faculty is an obstacle for our mission as educators. So one of the things that's the angle that I brought to you. If we are going to educate our students, we need to educate ourselves first. Um, all of us, right? So we can have a common understanding and we can have a common protocol and plan and tools to help us not just protect and remedy situations that happen in the moment, but also prevent and educate so students are more racially aware, they're literate, they understand where racism comes from, the different types of racism, how race is a social construct, how did that happen, right? How does it affect us, or not, or you think it doesn't, right? Your position within the racist spectrum too. If we need to know it first as faculty, we need to be aware of it first. We need to talk about it and think about it first in order to help our students understand it. It's not a simple issue, and it involves also our personal histories, right? So it is a touchy subject for everyone. So
Let me thank you, Bea, and let me ask you, Raquel. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a listener today, and if I'm a parent and maybe I don't know a lot about this type of work or what it entails, I may ask. So why is this work important, and why do we? I mean, why do we have to teach this at St. John's? How would you answer that question?
I think, first of all, I would answer that question thinking about our community and thinking about the fact that we are not a racially homogeneous community. And even if we were, we would need to do this work. But thinking about the people who make up the St. John's community, there are students of color. We have Chinese, Puerto Rican students. We have Afro-Boricua students, and we have everyone in between that as well. And there are certain ways that some people feel more invited in the community, and some people feel as like they are a natural part of the community. And then there are other ways that other folks don't feel represented or visibilized in this community. And so,
and this, I mean, this is not what we think. We know this for a fact from your work with students.
Yeah. And I know that there are ways that certain students have been uncomfortable, not just because of things that have happened between students, but because of things that have happened between students and staff and students and faculty members as well. And so I think that if we have as part of our mission to teach future leaders, then we need to teach our students how to advocate for themselves, one. And so our students who are Afro-Boricua or Chinese Puerto Rican or, students who are not white, then if they feel like they are not being visibilized, or if they feel like they are being discriminated against for whatever reason, then I think it's important for us to teach them that they can be advocates for themselves and that we are advocates for them as well. So there's that part for me that's about, I think for me, the most important part of this piece is to make sure that everybody feels like they're a member of the community. And then on the other end, to students that are white, that to make them understand that they also have a racial identity, right? And that they also walk through this world, with that identity. And that also leads to them having a certain conception of the world. And to kind of show students and faculty members, but I can focus mostly on the students, to kind of help them to see that lens, help them to see it's as if they're fish, right? And help the fish to see the water, right? We used that metaphor in our group meeting once. I think that's important because it is part of the world that we live in. And in order to be able to navigate the world, it's important to consider the different constructs that make up the world that we live in.
And to kind of showcase how complicated this issue, this topic is, I'll use myself as an example, and I'll ask you, Beatriz, if you am I considered white? Like if you saw me, am I a white person?
Yes.
What does that mean? Mm-hmm.
Well, that means that your phenotype.
But I am Puerto Rican, so
Okay.
how am I white if I'm Puerto Rican?
So, because racism is a social construct, it varies depending on the setting, on where you are. You would be considered white if nobody knew your name or heard you speak in Puerto Rico or in the States because you look more North European. North European is key here, right? Not Mediterranean, not necessarily Eastern European, North European, right? Pale skin, fair hair, clear, the eyes are blue or green or right.
Ooh.
But if you take me, for example, in Puerto Rico, somebody will describe me as blanca, white, okay? Because I'm fair skin. But when I was in Michigan, I was brown. Now I don't change colors, of course. But the setting changed, and therefore, because I look Mediterranean, I was identified as Latina or Hispanic, and therefore not considered white. So why? Because that's a social construct. Now, does that mean that race doesn't exist? Well, it does. It's made up, but that doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. That doesn't mean that it doesn't affect how people treat you. That doesn't mean that people don't judge you from looking at you by your race or perceived race. Yes, the fact that it's made up doesn't mean it doesn't have a history or an effect in people's daily lives, right? So yes, you will consider white because you are white, because you would fall under that category in the racial spectrum, and therefore you will probably be treated very differently than somebody that looks black.
And I thank you for clarifying that, because I think it also illustrates how much we don't know or how much we're not aware of. And I'll give an example of something that happened to me in my home. And this example also illustrates the fact that our students are so much more literate than my generation around this topic. I was invited to attend the convention of an organization called Education Leaders of Color. And when I'm packing and I'm getting ready to go, my daughter asks me where I'm going, and I told her I was very excited. Oh, I'm going to go participate in this convention. I can't wait. Blah blah blah. And she's like, "What convention? Education?" I'm like, "Well, Educational Leaders of Color." And she looks at me, and with this face, she says, "Have they seen you?" And I'm thinking, why would she even ask me that? I mean, I said no, and then I was kind of taken. She kind of blindsided me. I'm like, well, they know I'm from Puerto Rico. They know I am a minority woman leader in education. So I got invited. But the entire flight to my destination, I kept thinking about this. And it was the first time this happened 2 years ago. It was the first time when I was aware that I don't look Puerto Rican, whatever that means, right? So what is that literacy? Why is that literacy? Well, actually, we know why it's important. How are we thinking about teaching our students and our faculty about this? Like, what work has the committee already done, and what work is the committee thinking about doing moving forward to kind of create that awareness and then teach this literacy among all of our stakeholders?
Well, it's not just that you may look Anglo or North European, it's also that in Puerto Rico, there are also differences between fair-skinned people and dark-skinned people. Regardless of how your family may look like in a family picture, you are judged immediately on a daily basis by the color of your skin here. It's yes, and then there are statistics that prove that. So that's why here I'm white, right? Because I'm not what in Puerto Rico will be considered as somebody that's not white, right? So Raquel started working with the group, and it was actually her idea before she joined the committee, right, Raquel? And you've done a lot of work with the students.
So can we talk a little bit about that, the work that you've done, Raquel, and also as a larger, because I know you do work with your students in your class, and you have the club. So we can talk a little bit about that, and then how are we branching this out to reach more students? And then Bea, you can talk a little bit about the work we've done with faculty.
I think that that you also just speak to something that that lots of people struggle with, not just people of your generation, as you say, Lorraine, but like this idea that we exist as people on a spectrum, right, of race and of colors. And maybe I think in Latinx communities or in Puerto Rican communities, it's more appropriate or even easier for people to talk of colorism, right? So even though, like, if you have 3 different people and they're all Boricuas, right? And they're one is a Black Puerto Rican, one is a white Puerto Rican, and one is some kind of brown in the middle. Those 2 people on the ends of the spectrum, whether or not they're Black or they're white, people would say, "Oh, but you don't look Puerto Rican," right? Because you think of somebody that's more brown skin. But in terms of the opportunities that all of those people get, right, and the treatment that all those people get, the person that is on the whiter end of the spectrum is going to see the treatment that is more fair, right? And so I think it's like this kind of breaking down the difference between ethnicity and race is really important, and sometimes, and also naming Blackness, right, and naming anti-Blackness as like the core of this work is important. So part of the work that I have at least done, like as I was talking about in my student group, is to just get ourselves on the same page, and getting students to, so much of this work is personal, to really investigate how we have perpetuated white supremacy and anti-Blackness in our own lives, right? Or how we see those 2 things kind of in our own families, right? With our own family members that also exist on a spectrum. And it's not been easy, and it's not been comfortable. And I think one of the things that I've set up from the beginning in my student group is that you have to start from the beginning. We started in August, and so there were many students that wanted to join the group in January. And I told them that they couldn't, because I mean, even though it's wonderful that you want to, join this group, we've already set up a safe space and a brave space to talk about these issues and ask questions and make and tell our own experiences, so that to have somebody just coming in new would be disruptive. And so I think that going forward, it's really important for us to make those spaces where students, faculty, and staff can be vulnerable. I always advocate for an advisory curriculum that has this elements to it, And small group work, consistent small group work, and honest small group work in which faculty members are doing the same investigative personal work as students is important. So whenever we read a chapter of me and white supremacy, or whenever we're talking about anything, or doing any kind of activity, I always go first, which, and I always, say to the students, okay, and now it's my time to sweat. I get super nervous because I'm also sharing something about myself. But then I can see how that makes them more open to share. So making intentional spaces of vulnerability, I think, is really important. But I also recognize that it's not easy.
But I think you said it, intentional spaces. I think that's, if in a nutshell I had to, or in 2 words, I had to summarize what we're aiming for in terms of work with students, is intentional spaces. This work has to be intentional. It's not because something happens, you talk about it. At the same time, you discipline a student, you tell them why that wasn't right, or why something is offensive, and then it's over. This is intentional spaces to really explore, and the trust factor is huge. So we need to help teachers learn how to create those spaces that lead to trust and then lead to opening up. So I'm really looking forward to having those spaces built into our time in school for students.
Sorry, if I could just interrupt for a second, but just to add to that, to what you said, I think it's important that in our race and equity group, that the administrators are there too, because in the same way that it's important for students to see us doing the work, I think it's important for us, the faculty, to see the administrators, wrangling with these intense questions as well.
Yes, and that is really important. And I love the fact that the committee is not shy and trusts their administrators and is able to tell them that, because sometimes we get caught up in the craziness of this transitory world we are living in, and we send messages that we don't mean to send. I can tell you that as administrators as well, we are committed to this work, and we find it extremely difficult, and we trust the committee, and I know we will become vulnerable within that committee and while doing this work. Bea, if before we go, I'd like to ask you what we've done with faculty and how we're thinking about creating those intentional spaces for faculty as well.
So many things. There have been a lot of activities this year, even though we've had the obstacle of the pandemic. Some have been just for the faculty, but I know that the student activities have also had a high faculty attendance. For example, last term we brought Dr. Zaida Dinse, who is a scholar of race. She is a professor at Rutgers University. And we brought her with Andres Ramos, DJ Velcro, who's an artist, a hip hop artist, a local hip hop artist.
And an alumnus from St. John's.
St. John's, yes. And we brought them, although Dr. Dinse talked about her work as a scholar, she framed it under the perspective of someone who, like Andres Ramos, is an alumna from a prep school, an American prep school. She went to Caribbean school, right? And they both talked about what it was to be the only or one of the very few Black Puerto Rican students in an American prep school, which are, as you know, predominantly white in Puerto Rico. And how that informed their work as professionals, DJ Velcro or Andres Ramos in his art, and Dr. Lindsay Flores in her scholarly work, right? And that it was for the students, but we received a lot of feedback from faculty. Just like Yolanda Arroyos Pizarro was brought by the librarian, the library director, St. Mary Burgos, and that was a children's story, Pero Bueno, right? But we know we receive feedback from faculty that attended it too.
Mhm.
Um, you and Zaira Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez, introduced this initiative to the faculty in the first term. And then this term, we've had Dr. Izargodro, who gave a conference about race and particularly individual racism and the difference of individual racism and systemic and institutional racism, because that's the work that we're going to do with the faculty and staff to talk about institutional and systemic racism. That happened like 3 weeks ago, more or less, and we received a lot of good feedback. At the end of this term, we are going to have a workshop, an immersive workshop with Colectivo ILE, who have been working on racial awareness and education for over a decade, and who are also participating or collaborating with the UPR initiative, the University of Puerto Rico initiative, in their new Afro-diasporic and Afro-Boricua program. We are also going to collaborate with them. And I'm glad that Raquel mentioned the administration, because that's where they're going to do the work. We're going to have professional developments that will address these issues with the steering committee, the Race and Equity Committee, that includes uh, the principals and the deans, right? Among other
The head of school, don't forget me.
school. And we're going to do some work is going to be intellectual, but another is going to be introspective, and we're going to have to deal with these issues. Because, as Raquel said, we have to do the work in order for our colleagues to do it too. So, and that will be
Absolutely.
next year too. So this is not just a 1 year thing. This is a multi-year.
It's a multi-year initiative for sure, and it's work that will have to always be present.
Yeah.
Um,
In UPR, we talked with Dr. Marielba Torres, who
Mhm.
is one of the two founders, along with Dr. Mayra Santos Febres of the initiative, and we're very happy with their collaboration.
See, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this it changes our community, and at some point I think it would be awesome if we could do something for parents, talk to them a little bit about the definitions that we are using, the common language that we are using to frame this work that we're going to do, that, as you said, it's individual, it's intellectual, it's introspective, and then it's collective in the way, in as much as we can create these intentional spaces for all of us to be vulnerable, to look within, to become aware, and to change the way our institution, and hopefully our greater community and systems in Puerto Rico work. I am thrilled that you were able to take the time to do this with me today. This will be one of many times I will invite you to give us updates on what's happening. And I am extremely proud to call you my colleagues and excited to continue doing this work. Thank you for being here with me today. And thank you, St. John's community, for listening.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.